Okay, so another title for today's shir is 7-Eleven, in honor of it coming to Israel this week, I think. You know what 7-Eleven is? If you grew up in America, you know. So now 7-Eleven. But when I say 7-Eleven, I'm talking about chapter 7 to chapter 11 in Sefer Shmot. And what's going to be behind this shir is the understanding that from chapter 7 through 11 is a unit. Once you understand it as a unit, the whole story of the Exodus will make a lot more sense. Okay. So first, let me explain to you why I see it as a unit. And then after that, we'll get to work. Now, remember, Moshe has two jobs. Moshe at the burning bush gets two jobs to do. If you want to make it nice and simple, one job is to take the Jews out of Egypt, and the other job is to take Egypt out of the Jews. In other words, his first job is to go to Pharaoh and convince him to send the Jews out. That's to get the Jews out of Egypt. Once the Jews are out of Egypt, it's Moshe's job to get them ready to serve God. Right? Get the Egypt out of the Jews, to dump Egyptian culture and begin to accept God as their boss and enter a brit at Har Sinai. And these people in Israel, and let me open the window real fast. Okay, now I want to pay attention to something. It's very confusing in the beginning of Parshat Va'era. Share my screen and open up a Chumash, and we're going to go to Parshat Va'era, we're in Shmot, aren't we? Shmot, chapter 6. Remember, Parshat Shvuah begins with the famous 4 cups. Elokim tells Moshe, Ani Hashem, and I appeared to your forefathers, etc. Therefore, tell Bnei Israel, Ani Hashem, I'll take you out of Egypt, Potzeti, Vitzalti, Vigalti. I'll bring you to Har Sinai, then you know that's the first commandment, Ani Hashem Elokechem, Amotzietchem mitachat sidot Mitzrayim. And then I'll bring you to the land of Israel, and you'll have it as a possession, a morashah. Basically, God's telling Bnei Israel, number one, I'm your new boss, Ani Hashem. I'm your God. And for that reason, I'm taking you out of Egypt, for a covenantal reason. I'm taking you out of Egypt. I'm going to fulfill Brit Ben Abtarim. V'lakachti, what's it say in the beginning? V'otzeiti, got it? V'tzalti, v'ga'alti. That's getting out of Egypt. That's clearly Har Sinai. That's Brit Sinai. And then you'll understand, you'll internalize that I'm Hashem, your boss, who took you out of Egypt. And then once you accept that, then I can bring you to the land and I can help you conquer it. And again, the final line is, Ani Hashem, I'm your boss. Now remember, the people were suffering in slavery. They just doubled the workload. Moshe tells this great message of redemption to Bnei Israel, and they don't listen. Moshe, they don't accept. It's over their head. In a nutshell, at this point, Am Yisrael is not ready yet for redemption. And Moshe failed on 2 counts. He failed his first encounter with Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't send them out. At worst, he doubles the workload. And he fails now talking to Am Yisrael. And that's why he wants to give up his job. Now, what does God tell Moshe after these 2 failures? By Hashem and Moshe Limor, go again to Pharaoh, send my people out. And Moshe says very wisely, I'm a failure. He says, Bnei Israel didn't listen to me. Even a message of redemption, listen. And why should Pharaoh obey me? If Bnei Israel don't obey me, don't hear me. If I can't relay a message of redemption, how am I going to relay a message to convince Pharaoh to take them out? And I'm no one to talk. Whatever our Rosh time here means, either he's not eloquent, or he doesn't know how to speak, or he's not the person to speak. Or it's irrelevant for now. God doesn't accept his refusal, and therefore, by Davar Hashem and Moshe ve'Aaron, by Tzavema Bnei Israel, he commands him again to Bnei Israel and to Paro, or to Paro. Most people say about Bnei Israel, to take Bnei Israel out of Egypt. But I think it's referring to both commandments. It's Moshe and Aaron are commanded to get Bnei Israel ready for redemption, and to get Paro, to convince Paro to take us out. What should follow? What should follow should be the story of the plagues. Instead, we have an insert. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Notice we have these Toledot, or these Roshei Beit Avotam. I'm sure you've seen this before. This whole section about the family, Moshe's family, clearly doesn't belong here. if it's going to be anywhere in Sefer Shemot, it should be in chapter 2 or chapter 1, introducing the story, or before or after the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. And notice, we're not studying this today, but everything goes in threes. That's what we begin with. We bring 3 tribes: Ruvain, Shimon, right? Ruvain, Shimon, and then Levi. Got it? 3 tribes. We get to the 3rd tribe. Bnei Levi has 3 sons: Gershon, Kat, and Mari. Okay. And then what do? We have the sons of Gershon. The sons of Kat also happen to be 3 sons. No, actually 4 sons Kat has. And Bnei Mari, another 2. But we have the 3 sons of Levi. And then we go 3 generations in the family of Kat. We have Kahat, and then we have Amram, right? And then we get to Moshe. And then we follow 3 marriages. We have whose marriages do we follow? We follow the marriage of Aaron marrying Elisheva. We have Amram marrying Yocheved. We have Aaron marrying Elisheva. And then we have Elazar taking from Beno Petiah for Nisha. And we get to the birth of Pinchas. Anyway, for whatever reason, we have this unit that stands alone. But what I want to claim is it's going to be a buffer between God speaking to Moshe to tell Bnei Yisrael to get ready for redemption. He failed. The people don't listen. We have this buffer. And now we're going to pick up the story again. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go speak to Paro Melech Mitzrayim. Everything I'm telling you. And Moshe again says, Ani Ras V'Tayim. We're picking up where we left off, as Rashi points out. What I want to point out now is starting in chapter 7, Am Yisrael is out of the picture. This is my key point to understand the rest of this year. From chapter 7 on, we'll see from chapter 7 to chapter 11, the whole focus is on God and Egypt. And slowly we have to convince Pharaoh to send the Jews out of Egypt to go serve the God in the desert. Right? That's going to be the story here, which we're going to follow. But Am Yisrael is out of the picture. They're not getting any commands. Moshe isn't talking to them. We'll see almost until the end. But now let me explain to you why this is a unit. I'm going to explain something. I'm going to unshare my screen for a minute and explain what I mean. I want to review something which I'm assuming you're familiar with. And I think I've done this year before. I'll just go over it one more time, the basics. The classic story of the Exodus is that God comes to, in all the movies, is that God comes to Moshe at the burning bush. And God tells Moshe, go down to Pharaoh, tell him, let my people go. And then Pharaoh says, no, I won't let my people go. I won't let your people go. God brings 10 plagues. After 10 plagues, Pharaoh's finally convinced, tells Am Yisrael, get out of my country, go away. Don't want to see you again. And then a couple of days later, he changes his mind, chases after them, and they get washed up. And Pharaoh, that's a classic story, agreed? In all the movies. But if you know Chumash, that's definitely not the story. I'm assuming you know that. I'll go over the real story. The real story is, actually, someone tell me, I have to drink something. Someone tell me what's the real story. Does Moshe ever ask Pharaoh for freedom? Anyone remember?
No, he asks for an opportunity to worship God.
I agree with you halfway. He doesn't ask Pharaoh for an opportunity. He demands that Pharaoh send us out to serve our God, a 3-day distance in the desert. We're not asking permission to go serve our God. We need Pharaoh to send us out to serve our God. In other words, I need to leave Egypt by Egyptian command. Because if you tell people you have to go to shul, what do you mean? They're going to stay home. You have to pull them, you have to force them to go to shul. You'll see what I mean in a minute. That's what's called shalach et ami. It's not let them free. He never says let my people go. And we're going to see we need Pharaoh, not just Pharaoh, the entire Egyptian people to throw us out of Egypt in order to serve our God, a 3-day distance into the desert. If Pharaoh gave us permission to leave, because this is a Zionist program, so I can say this, and you guys all made Aliyah already. If Pharaoh gave us permission to leave Egypt, you can count on your hands how many Jews would have left, no matter how bad it is, because there's nowhere for them to go to. Where are they going to go? To the desert? And what's my proof? When they're in the desert, what's on their mind all the time? We want to go back to Egypt. We don't care how bad it was. It's worse. No matter how bad it was in Egypt, the desert is worse. So that's number one. I don't need Pharaoh to give us permission to go free. that won't help anything. It definitely won't get the entire people out of Egypt, and it won't get us out of Egypt with great wealth. What do we need instead? We need to convince not just Pharaoh, the entire Egyptian people, that it's in their interest that we leave Egypt. Why? Because if we don't serve our God that 3-day distance into the desert, what will happen? There'll be more and more plagues. In fact, let me just go back and show you, just to prove it. The first encounter between Moshe and Pharaoh, actually, do I have it in a different? I'll just show you here. The first time Moshe encounters Pharaoh in chapter 5, what's he tell him? Vayamru Elohei Ivrim Nikra Eleinu. The God of Pharaoh's command. The God told us we have to go a 3-day distance into the desert. Listen, V'nizbachal Hashem Elokeinu, to serve our God. Pen yifga'enu b'dever o b'cherev. If we don't serve our God, we're going to get plagued by pestilence and sword. People are going to die. It's going to be ugly. And if you want to prevent this from happening to us, who's us? Us can be your servants. Us can be everybody in Egypt. Us can be a nice way of saying you. That's what it ends up becoming. He's saying if you want to prevent these terrible plagues from happening, the only way to stop it is to allow us, is to make sure that we go serve our God in the desert. Of course, Pharaoh says, never heard of this God, doubles the workload. Moshe gets really angry. Remember? And Moshe turns to God and says, why'd you make things worse than they were before? Okay? And why'd you send me? He says, and I've been a failure. Ever since I went to Pharaoh, things only got worse, and you didn't save your people. Moshe is pretty much aghast to what's happening. And this is what God tells Moshe Rabbeinu. I call this Moshe's in the dark. We'll see. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you'll see what I'll do to Pharaoh, because when I'm finished with him, not only is he going to let you go, he's going to send you out with the Yad Chazakah. How he's going to send you out? He's going to expel you with the Yad Chazakah. It's Pharaoh's Yad Chazakah, as Rashi points out. And we'll see later in the story. It's Egypt forces us out, the Egyptian people and their leadership forces us out of Egypt to go serve our God. Not to go free, but they demand we serve our God because that's the only way we're going to stop the plagues. Now, how do I convince Pharaoh? Now we get to our topic in chapter 7. Then maybe I'll go to an English Hebrew Tanakh, it'll be easier to read. Okay, let me give a quick summary, and then we're going to get to work. What I want to show you is little by little. Let me stop this here and open up a different one. I want to show you little by little that the main thing, Moshe's main job basically, we'll see in a minute, is to fail. God has a master plan. Moshe is not aware of his master plan. He just knows his job is to follow orders. Remember, I'll just show you this real quick. Look what Moshe's job is in chapter 3. At the burning bush, when Moshe gets his first appointment, what does God tell him? Actually, let me open up an English Hebrew Tanakh better. It'll be easier to see the wording. Okay, right here, I have to open up English Hebrew. Here we go, Exodus. Make it a little bit smaller. Okay. Everyone knows the burning bush narrative. Listen, God introduces himself, and God tells Moshe, I've seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I heard their cry. I know their pain. And because I heard their suffering, God's saying, I'm coming down to take them out of Egypt and bring them to the promised land. Got it? God's going to take them out of Egypt. And then he says, I heard their cry, and therefore you go and take them out of Egypt. And then Moshe starts asking questions how to do it. But basically, God is going to take us out of Egypt. He needs Moshe Rabbeinu to run the plays, to get the job done. He needs Moshe Rabbeinu to execute the play. But Moshe is the one. God's taking us out of Egypt. He has a master plan. Moshe's job is not to get them out of Egypt. Moshe's job is to do what God tells him to do, to facilitate it happening. It's not Moshe's job to make the strategy. God is running the strategy. He's the head coach. Moshe's job is simply to execute the plays. Now we get to let's go to the beginning of chapter 7. Now, Moshe says, remember, he doesn't want the job, and God tells him, Aaron will help you. But Moshe, we're in chapter 7. God tells Moshe, hey, I'm making you like liaison, that you're God's spokesperson to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your spokesperson, meaning I'll speak to you to tell you what to do. You'll tell Pharaoh to relay that to Pharaoh, to Aaron, to tell that to Pharaoh. And what message do you tell Pharaoh? Lach et bnei Yisrael mi'artzom. He has to send Am Yisrael out of his land. That your job is to convince Pharaoh to send Am Yisrael out of the land to go serve their God. Then God tells Moshe, your job is to warn Pharaoh if he doesn't let us go serve our God. It doesn't demand we serve. If we don't serve our God, there'll be terrible plagues. But then God's telling them, I'm going to make you fail. I'll make sure that Pharaoh hardens his heart so that I can bring a lot more plagues. Okay? Your job is to warn him. Your job is to fail. And I'm going to make sure he won't give in so I can bring more stuff. I'll make sure. And I'm going to bring my hand. It means I'll bring more plagues against Egypt. And then after that, I'll take my people out of Egypt. And when it's all done, Egypt will know that I'm Ani Hashem when I do these things, and then I'll take my people out of Egypt. And then we have a summary, which is really an introduction. That's going forward, not backward. Pay attention to this. This line is not saying what happened already or what's happening. It's what's going to happen. Moshe and Aaron are going to do exactly what God commanded, which is to go to Pharaoh and tell him to send my people out, even though they're going to fail. And then we have an introduction again. And Moshe was 80 at the time. Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. Then we have what's called the nine plagues. Now, without doing all the 9 plagues, there's one thing that all the plagues have in common. Everyone knows there's 3, 3, 3. 3 hit the river, 3 hit the land, 3 hit the sky, pretty much. With the transition one, a little bit of both. And the first one, of each set, meet him at the river. The second one, meet him in his palace. The third one without the warning. Every plague is different. Every plague has a different sequence. There's only one thing that's common to every single plague, which is what? At the end of the plague, Pharaoh doesn't give in. The only thing that all the plagues share in common, if you look at the last phrase of every plague, I can show you real fast if you want. We'll get through the section doing it that way. I want to show you at the end of every plague, either Pharaoh hardens his own heart or God hardens it for him. Let's take a quick look in chapter 7. Go here. After Dam, look at the end of the 7th plague. At the end of, even the first thing with the here. After the Tanin, the first sign, the first Mofet. End of the unit. We have Makat Dam. How does it end? Okay. Okay. That's Dam. Then we have Parshat Bo. We have Parshat Bo. Then we have Tzfardea. Look what happens at the end of Tzfardea in chapter 8. So I want to make sure we're right. Okay. Paro saw there was a pause in the plague, hardened his heart. He didn't listen. Either by chazek or hachbedet libo. Plague number 3. What happens? That's 3. That's plague number 4. What happens at the end? Why sometimes mechabed, what times chazek? Not our topic today. It's just at the end of every plague, Pharaoh either hardens his heart or God does it for him. Next plague, Perek Tet. Take a quick look. What happens at the end of the plague? Next plague, number 6, Shchin. See that? Plague number 7. That's the long one. What happens at the end? Okay, we're up to plague number 8. Look at plague number 8. Watch this. Let's look at the beginning. Moshe and Aaron go to Pharaoh and tell him, Send my people out again to serve me. Remember, he never says Shalach et ami, he always says Shalach ami v'yavduni. Send my people out to serve me in the desert to stop the plagues. What happens now? Pasuk Zayin. V'amru abdei Paro elav. Paro's own servants, not his servants, it means his cabinet ministers. How long is this nation going to be a stumbling block for us? Shalach et anashim v'yavdu et Hashem Elohehem atem teda ki avda Mitzrayim. Pharaoh's cabinet ministers are convinced the only way to stop the plagues is for the Jews to go out. He says, Egypt's getting ruined. Everyone's convinced after so many plagues and warnings. You understand why Moshe has to fail? Most has to fail, so more and more people in Egypt are convinced that the only way to stop these plagues is for the Jews to serve the God in the desert, like Moshe has been warning them. Okay? So they invite Paro and Moshe and Aaron to come back. Okay, he says, "Go serve your God." Who's going? And then Moshe says, "Everybody," and Paro says, "No way." Remember, only the men can go, and he sends them out. God brings Makat Arbeh, and guess what happens at the end? Okay? Then we get to Choshech. Okay, let's pick up Choshech now from. But I hope my point is clear. Here, let's look at Choshech. What happens after 3 days of Choshech? Vayemesh Choshech, Moshe. There's 3 days of Choshech in Egypt. What should Pharaoh do now? I should expect him to harden his heart. Now I want to pick up I want to go to the English Hebrew. Tanakh, where are we here? And Exodus, so we go. We're at the end of chapter 10. Chapter 10. Let's follow this dialogue now, this argument now. Remember, the last time negotiations broke down on the women and children, correct? Pharaoh says, let the men go, and Moshe says, everyone has to go. So after Choshech, pay attention, Bnei Israel had Or b'Moshe after Choshech. Vayikra Paro Moshe v'yamer l'chu ivdu et Hashem, rak tzunchem v'vcherchem yutzag gam techem imechem. Pharaoh says, okay, let the women and children go. Fine. Just leave some cattle behind. Now, what's Moshe saying? Gam atay, even if you give us the animals to bring, and we bring them to God, that's not enough. We have to take our own cattle with us. We can't leave anything behind. We have to take everything with us to serve our God, because we don't know what God will ask for when we get there. You might ask, who knows what he's asked for? He gives this crazy excuse why everything has to come. He doesn't say we're taking everything because we're not coming back, right? If you want to tell the truth, just say we need everything because we're not coming back. He's giving the impression that we are coming back. And the only reason we have to take everything with us is because we don't know what God will need to serve our God. Everyone has to be at this gathering, we have to bring everything with us. Now, someone tell me, I'll stop the thing for a minute. I'm sorry. Here's the next line. Paro doesn't give in. Got that? And then Paro says, get up, pick up this in a minute. Why? And again, that's 9 plagues now where Pharaoh hardened his heart. Or God hardened it for him. Where are we? Someone tell me what Pharaoh's afraid of. Why is Pharaoh so worried about the Jews taking all the things with them? Real simple. What's he worried about?
That they won't come back.
That they won't come back. And then what will he lose?
All his slaves.
That's right, the work output. So Pharaoh's in a dilemma. Is it worth the risk of his losing all his slaves? But if he doesn't send them out to go serve their God, what will happen? More and more plagues are coming. So who's that? What you just said, I'm going to disagree with. My claim is Pharaoh is no one in Egypt is worried about the Jews not coming back. I know it sounds a little strange, but in my opinion, no one in Egypt would believe that the Jews are going anywhere other than staying in Egypt. They've been in Egypt for hundreds of years. They're part of Egyptian society. The fact that a couple hundred years back, some of their great-grandparents lived for a couple of centuries, for a couple of decades in Israel doesn't mean anything to them. That was hundreds of years ago, and that was so far in the past, and before then they were Ur Kasdim. They're a nomadic, they're Ivrim, they don't have a land anywhere. There's no way they can take over Canaan. Even after a year of miracles, 10 of the 12 leaders think it's impossible to take over Canaan. What do you want people to think? Before, there's no way over 1 million people can survive in the desert, in the Sinai. They can't survive in the Sahara. They can't live in the sea. If they go south, they're still in Egypt. There's nowhere for them to go. But my whole point is, in the eyes of Egypt, the Jews are going nowhere. They're in Egypt. The only question is, are they going to be fourth-class citizens doing manual labor and getting cheap wages without the right to vote or anything? Or are they going to be fourth-class citizens, what we call slaves, doing all menial labor and not having equal rights? Or are they going to, what's their fare? Or are they going to try to take over our country, declare independence? Or maybe a two-state, I want to say two-state solution. Yeah, Phil, go ahead.
The
Just
3
unmute.
days.
Yeah.
Why did they start with a 3-day business?
So my point is, people always ask, like the Rashbam's famous question is, why is Moshe lying?
Yeah, I
Why
didn't want
can't he
to
tell the
do it.
truth? I mean, it's the Sefer Shemot have to be. Reshit had enough lies, didn't it? Enough lying. Why does Shemot have to begin with lying? Why are we lying all the time? We have the most powerful God. Why can't we just tell Pharaoh we want to go out of Egypt? We have God can bring all the plagues He wants. God can just make them all fall asleep one day and take us out. Why this game? You follow?
Yeah.
Why can't we tell the truth when sometimes you have to lie? But why lie when you don't need to?
That's the question.
Yeah. So my claim is, if you told the truth, no one would believe you. Got my point? It's like I give a proof. I have a lot of friends who live in Teaneck, in America. 3 times a day they say we want to go back to Jerusalem. We want to go back to Israel. They pray all the time, especially on Mondays and Thursdays. They say we're stuck here in exile. It's terrible. Please come and save us and bring us back to our land. And no one believes them. I'm half joking. Got my point? But what I'm getting at, in Egypt, the Jews are part of Egypt. Now, there's been like some 25, 30 dynasties in ancient Egypt. Every 50, 100 years is a new dynasty. Why? Egypt is a powerful country. And everyone wants to run the government. Okay? They don't have elections. Right? It's what do you call it? It's a power struggle. Who has the most power? And therefore, if you want to take over Egypt, you don't wait for 4 years for the next election. What do? Yeah. You take it over. You have a mass rebellion, whatever you do. So either another family member might want to take over the government, take over the kingdom. Another ethnic group in Egypt might come and take over, like a people's revolt. Or you might have like what happened in Iran a couple decades ago. Or you might have an outside enemy, like the Hyksos, the Abiru might come, or like the another enemy might come in, an outside enemy might come and take over Egypt. That happens over and over again. Every 100 years or so, there's another dynasty taking over Egypt. And every pharaoh worth his name is always watching his back from a takeover. From within his family, from another ethnic group, from an outside enemy. And that's how Sefer Shemot begins. Remember, Am Yisrael is getting too big. They might come and join an outside enemy, and that'll be the 5th column from the inside. Remember, it means an enemy will come from the outside. They'll come from the inside, and they'll take over our country. They're a danger to national security.
So you're saying the 3 days will be more realistic than let us go completely.
Yeah. If he would say, let us go completely, they wouldn't believe him.
Yeah, that's why.
What would they think he's up to? That they're saying, if he would say, we want to go free, they would say, you don't want to go free. What do you want to do? You want to go out to the desert and come back and take over. You follow?
Yeah.
They wouldn't believe a claim we want to leave the country and go free. They wouldn't believe it.
So the line quotes is there to make them feel that reality.
It's more realistic. Number 2, it's not a lie. We do go serve our God. And here's the main point. We need to convince Egypt. It's in their interest that we leave. Why? And I can do this because it's Mizrahi. Harold will like this. Okay? I'll finally say something Zionist. Zionist. I need Egypt to kick us out. The Jews are not going to leave if someone doesn't kick you out. If you're not thrown out, we're not going to leave anywhere. To get the Jews out of Egypt, I need the Egyptians to do the dirty work. Now, and I need great wealth. How am I going to convince all of Egypt to kick us out? I need a joint effort of all the Egyptian people. I need to convince the Egyptian people in their entirety that the only way to stop this global warming or this natural disasters, all these terrible plagues, is for the Jews to serve their God way out there in the desert, a 3-day distance into the desert. How do you convince them? You warn them, and you warn them, and you warn them, and you warn them. And after a while, they'll put 2 and 2 together. It's like I'll give you a bad example for global warming. Let's say 20 years ago, some crazy guy writes this paper and says, in 50 years, there'll be tidal waves, New York's gonna be covered in water. You follow? All the world economy will fall apart because we put a hole in the ozone. And someone says if we don't start recycling our plastic and what do you call it, and stop putting, if we don't start worrying about the ecology, there'll be terrible natural disasters. So no one will believe him, right? But let's say in his paper he said this will happen after 2 years, and this after 4 years, and this after 6 years. And every prediction he said came true for 10 years in a row. Got it? And his prediction was in 50 years, you follow? After 10 years, they'll realize that other countries should recycle. You follow? If you understand my joke. And after 20 years, they'll believe maybe my neighbor should recycle. And after 30 years, maybe even I should recycle. Unless I'm learning in yeshiva. Okay. Without being, hope you understand my joke. What I'm getting at is that how do you convince an entire people, right? How do you convince an entire nation that it's in their interest that the Jews go serve the God in the desert? That's why God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, your job is to fail. You go and warn Pharaoh, send my people out, otherwise there'll be a plague. We have to go serve our God a 3-day distance in the desert. And if we don't, there'll be another plague. And after 7 plagues we saw, Pharaoh's entire cabinet is in on it. Got that? Now, what's going to be the icing on the cake? I'm jumping to the end of the share. What's going to happen? Okay. After 9 plagues, we'll see, everyone's convinced. And then God's going to tell the people, they're going to kick you out of Egypt, but don't go so fast. They want you to go. Say, I'd love to go pray to my God. We need jewelry to pray to God. You can't go to shul without nice jewelry. You can't go to shul without nice clothing. We can't go to shul. We can't go to the desert without battle, without a little bit of arms to protect ourselves from wild animals and maybe, wild attackers and things. We're going to go chamushim, right? We're going to get arms. They're going to lend us everything. Why are they lending us everything? It's for their national survival. Because if we don't serve our God, there'll be another plague. Now, the last plague put the icing on the cake. Why? Because right before the 10th plague, every Egyptian saw the Jews bring a sacrifice, all right? They saw the blood on the doors.
Yeah.
And which homes were not hit by that plague?
Jewish.
Which proves that Jewish sacrifice can stop a plague. I can believe that this God, Elohei Ivrim, is bringing these plagues, but how do I know that Jewish sacrifice can stop it? Well, Korban Pesach proves it to him. And after Makat Bechorot, and the fact that the Jewish homes were not hurt, they're convinced. Got it?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And therefore say, go serve your God. And when we're leaving, and as we're leaving, we can borrow whatever we want, correct? I'll just show you the story. Because people don't realize after the 10th plague, Pharaoh doesn't let us free. He doesn't kick us out of the country. He forces us to go serve our God. But let me share the screen real fast. It's in chapter 12, but we read the story Pesach morning. Where are we? I'll make this a little bit smaller so it's not getting smaller, whatever it is. Let me get my thing over here. We got to get to chapter 12. Listen to the story, which we all know by heart. Remember, Paro gets up at night, right? And there's a tzaka. People are dead over Egypt. Here. Get up from my nation, you and Bnei Israel. Go serve your God like you asked for. Take even your cattle. Remember, now he gives in to the final. Take your cattle with you, your livestock, just as you asked for, and go serve your God and bless me. Got it? Pharaoh is demanding they go serve their God. He's not giving them freedom. Why do we leave? Listen carefully. But the entire Egyptian people are forcing us out. That's Yad Chazakah. Of course, it's God's Yad Chazakah bringing the plagues, but it's Egypt's Yad Chazakah forcing us out. They're convinced if the Jews don't go serve the God, we're all going to die. And it's in their interest. And that's why we can't, that's why we take the dough and run. We don't have, they don't let us bake our matzah, or bread. We had dough at night, we were going to make bread in the morning. We couldn't bake our bread like we did every morning. Why? Because Egypt didn't let us. And as we're doing, what do? We borrow from the Egyptians, with things we need for travel. And God gave favor in the eyes of the people. There's, just go, whatever you need, go. Here, take my keys, just go. Okay? And they lent them everything we asked for, and we took advantage of Egypt that way. That's how we got our Rechush Gadol. Then we travel on the way out. We'll see in a minute. And what do we have for breakfast? Vayafuta batzek. We read this at the Seder, right? Why are we eating matzah instead of chametz in the morning? Ki gorshu mitzrayim. They were expelled from Egypt to go serve their God, and they couldn't linger. But Egypt didn't let us. we were not in a rush. We were being rushed out by the Egyptians, and we had no other, and that's why we had to eat matzah. Not because we were commanded, it was because we were forced out. In fact, some people have a minhag on the anniversary of the Exodus to remember that we had to be forced out of Egypt to leave. And they eat matzah to remember that we were so unready to leave that God had to force us out. Now,
Rob?
understand? Where's Phil? Let me get back to me. I hope that was a long answer to your question. But I'm trying, it's a totally different read of the story, but I think it makes a lot more sense.
Well,
And that's why
weren't
if we
trying
just
to-
asked for freedom, no one would lend us anything.
well, it means that they weren't trying to trick Pharaoh. They were trying to make a believable threat,
That's right. And it worked.
and it worked.
And because again, God needs Egypt to kick us out.
Yeah.
Because the Jews are not ready to leave. You hear that all through the rest of Chumash. We want to go back to Egypt all the time. Part of Kriyat Yam
They weren't wrong. They died in the desert.
that's right. They didn't lie. They did go to serve the God. We went to Har Sinai, we brought Korbanot, and we didn't go to Israel. No one lied. Even Moshe didn't go to Israel. Got it? I don't know. None of them made it except for Yeshua and Caleb.
That's a long
Yeah.
question.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's get to the fun part. Let's go back now to our last let me go back to share my screen and look at the last negotiation, and something really strange is going to happen. Okay, where are we? We need to go to back to chapter 10. Okay. Remember, every single in between 7 and 11, in the 9 plagues, or the first 9 plagues, every plague, God hardens Pharaoh's heart, or he hardens his own heart. Okay. We had Choshech, and then Moshe says, Pharaoh gives in, and Moshe says, no, only everything. We have to take our own cattle as well. Okay. Now, look at Pharaoh's reaction now to here. We're at the end of, let me just review. After Choshech, there was 3 days of Choshech. Pharaoh calls Moshe and says, go serve your God. And Moshe says, even if you give us animals, it's not enough. We have to take our animals with us. We can't leave anything behind. Pharaoh, super angry by God hardening his heart again. And listen what Pharaoh says. Pharaoh, lech mi alai, get out of here. Hishamer lacham pen tosifrot panai. Don't you dare look at me again. Why? Because the next day you come here to my palace again, you're dead. Says you're a persona non grata. Don't you dare come in my palace again. I don't care what you want. That's Pharaoh saying, I've had it with you. Because he's afraid that they're lying, and they're going to go out and we'll see. And if they take all the women and children with them, Pharaoh's not afraid they're going to leave for good. He's afraid they're going to go out to the desert, say they're going to the desert, instead go to southern Egypt and just declare their own state, or maybe join an enemy, and maybe they'll take over. And maybe it's a rebellion. That's what he's afraid of. But what's Moshe say? You're right. I'm not coming back to your palace again. Now, how does Moshe know he's not coming back to his palace? What gives Moshe the right to say this? How come Moshe says, you're right, I'm not going to come back here again? I call this, if you know your football, that's an audible. It's the first time Moshe does something without God telling him what to do. But Pharaoh says, don't come back here again. Moshe says, okay, I'm not coming back here again. But it's the first time Moshe is telling Pharaoh something that God didn't tell him to say. How does Moshe know he's not coming back again? He didn't write Chumash yet. Now I have to go to a regular Tanakh. You have to see this in a, I'm going to do this on another short sheet now. Here, where's my screen? No, I can do on the same screen. My mistake. Okay. What happens next in chapter 11? Okay, Moshe and Pharaoh have a shout out. Listen carefully now. Vayomer Hashem and Moshe. Od negi achad avia paro. God tells Moshe, one more plague on Pharaoh. Then he'll send you out. Okay. After he sends you out, then what? This time now he'll send you out. He's going to kick you out. Got it? Basically saying the next plague is the last plague. What's God telling Moshe Rabbeinu? That's why I call Moshe's in the dark until Choshech. What's God telling Moshe Rabbeinu? The next plague is the last plague. Correct? Because what's God been doing every plague ever since the beginning of chapter 7? As he told Moshe, you warn him, but he's going to harden his heart. And that's what Pharaoh's been doing. What did God say to Moshe Rabbeinu? One more plague, Got it? Then he'll send you out. Meaning the next time I'm not going to harden his heart, and this time he'll kick you out. And because he's kicking you out soon, remind the people, tell the people to borrow from their friends, and God will give favor in the eyes of the people. Okay? And Moshe was already a big shot in Egypt because they respect him more than Pharaoh because every warning of his is coming true. Yes, he's winning the popularity vote already. Okay. Paro notes, Paro's advisors and the people think Moshe's right and Pharaoh's wrong. Now, someone tell me what should Moshe do now after this command? God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, the next plague is the last plague. Go tell the people to get ready to borrow. What should Moshe do now? Anybody following? What should Moshe do next?
Go to Paro, tell him that
Don't go back.
Should he go to Bnei Israel and tell them to remember to borrow? Or to go to? He can't go to. Why can't he go to Pharaoh?
So they
He'll
wouldn't go.
die. They'll kill him.
He just said, "I'm not coming back. He'll get killed." So listen, what Moshe does next.
He should tell the people to get ready to leave.
God said, "Daber na b'oznei ha'am." So listen, Vayomer Moshe, Ko amar Hashem kechotzot halayla ani yotzei b'toch Mitzrayim. Who's Moshe talking to? Chumash doesn't say, does it? But what's it sound like? What do you think who do you think he's talking to?
I'm Israel.
That's what it should be. Listen, but let's see what Moshe says. Okay, let's follow what he says. He's talking to somebody, we don't know who. Maybe Am Yisrael, maybe Pharaoh, we'll see. It doesn't make sense, Pharaoh, because he said he's not coming back, right? Kol Hashem, at midnight, I'm going to come to Egypt. Basically, at midnight, will be Bakat Bechorot, okay? And to be a great crying out in all of Egypt, like never before. Nothing will happen to Bnei Israel, right? So that what? So that you'll know that God separates between the Jews and the Egyptians. But listen carefully to Pasachet, Moshe is still talking. Yordu kol avadecha ele elai vishtachvu lemor se atava kom baraglecha v'acharchen eitzei. Who's Moshe talking to in Pasachet? All your servants are going
It
to come
has
to
to
me.
be Paro.
It's got to be Pharaoh, right? Because afterwards, what happens after the quote? Then Moshe leaves Pharaoh's palace. Because Moshe here is talking to Pharaoh. Most people don't realize that when all the Parshanim pointed out, but they have to point it out because it's unclear. Moshe is talking to Pharaoh and telling him about what? He's giving the warning about Makat Bechorot, correct? And he's telling him, you know what? I'm not coming to you next time. Next time you're coming to me. You're going to come to me. I'm not going to come to you, and you're going to kick me out. Now, number one, how does Moshe know about Makat Bechorot? You understand my question? When did Moshe find out about Makat Bechorot? He knows about it now, doesn't he? What did God tell him?
That Pharaoh is calling the shots and Pharaoh is pushing God to bring the last plague.
Yeah, but how does Moshe know what Moshe's warning Pharaoh about the last plague. But when did God tell Moshe about Makat Bechorot?
He told him at the start, at the burning bush, he told him about it.
He didn't say Makat Bechorot. He told Pharaoh, God told Moshe Midian, tell Pharaoh, if you don't let us go, I'll kill your firstborn. He didn't talk about when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen in every firstborn in Egypt and all the firstborn of the animals. Not all the details. Maybe he did, but we don't hear about it. Now, but what's the bigger problem? Didn't Moshe say, if Moshe's talking to Pharaoh, what's the big problem?
Pharaoh said he'd kill him if he came
That's
back.
right. So how did he get back in the office?
He never left.
And maybe he never left. What's the proof he never left? Because it says at the end of the story, by Tzemim Paro. So here, look at this source sheet now, and you'll see something. Wait a second. Share screen. Here we go. Share screen. Here we go. Here. I have this formatted. I hope you understand the format I have here. Got it? Okay. Paro goes to go serve your God. Remember, Paro says, "Get out of here." And Moshe says, "Right, I'm not coming back." You see this section that I have it inserted here? I'll even highlight it here. This section is a separate parshiah, agreed? Look in your Tanakh, right? If I shift delete, if I cut this out, Right? I have a perfect story. What happened? Moshe and Aaron are having a shout out, right? Paro says, get out of here. Don't come back here again. Moshe said, I'm not coming back again. And guess what, Paro? Makat Pechor is the next plague. And next time you're coming to me. Got it? In other words, if this wasn't here, it would read fine. Because Moshe never left. What's the problem? For some reason, God talks to Moshe in the middle of this argument. Is that clear? You see what's happening? Moshe and Aaron, this whole thing, let me do this better. Rotate. Here we go. This whole section goes right from here to here. And this is one big argument. Starting in Chav Daled. Paro calls Moshe and say, okay, just leave your cattle behind. Moshe says everything. Paro says, get out of here. And Moshe says, right, I'm not coming back again. And Moshe keeps on talking to Pharaoh. Says, you know what? Midnight, Makat Bechorot, it's over. And you're going to come to me. Now, why do we need this insert for? Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
Now, there's two problems here. If it's happening in real time, then how is God giving Moshe a nevuah in Pharaoh's palace? All the Parshim ask that question. And number two, why is God giving Moshe a nevuah in Pharaoh's palace? What's Moshe need to know that's so urgent? Okay. I'm going to repeat that because it's the key to the next part of this year. Here's the big question. There's two questions all the Parshim deal with here. Now, what is it? Why is God talking to Moshe? It's clear that everyone agrees that this is one long conversation between God and between Moshe and Pharaoh. Got it? Moshe never left. Moshe doesn't leave after this line. When Moshe says, I'm not coming back here again, he doesn't leave. He continues and tells him about Makat Bechorot, and then he says, you're going to come to me, and then he leaves. And then, I'm sorry, then they say, get rid of that for a minute. Then it says, where is this here? Here we go. Is at the very end. Got that? That's when he leaves. So in the middle, everyone agrees. And therefore, in the middle of this conversation, in the middle of this shout out between the two of them, God speaks to Moshe in the middle. So two big questions. How could God do such a thing? Right? And why is there a need? Why can't God tell this to Moshe later? Because he's telling him to go talk to Bnei Yisrael. Why tell him now? Can't he wait till he leaves Pharaoh's palace? And why is he telling him about one more plague? I'm not going to what's this about? And the other question is, how does Moshe know about Makat Bechorot? God never told him yet. So Ibn Ezra claims that this is a footnote. No, this is not God talking to Moshe. This is Chumash talking to the reader. I'll show you Ibn Ezra in a minute. Ibn Ezra claims that we're in the middle of a conversation. He reads these three psukim as a footnote to the reader. So the reader will have the background to understand the rest of the conversation. Oh, by the way, God had told Moshe that the next plague is the last plague. And he also told him at the same time, remind the people to go borrow, which explains why Moshe said, I'm not coming back here again. He's saying Moshe is not calling an audible. He knows, why did Moshe know to say, you're right, I'm not coming back here again? Because God already told him the next plague is the last plague. This is a flashback again. This is Chumash telling the reader God had said that to Moshe. Understand? Now, Rashi, Ramban, almost everyone else says, no, it's in real time because it doesn't say Bashem Amar, it says Vayomar Hashem Moshe. Okay? And then they explain why. Because he says they do the opposite. Because Moshe says, I'm not coming back here again, but Moshe has to come back and warn him about Makat Bechorot. So therefore, God had to give him a nevuah in Pharaoh's palace so Moshe wouldn't be a liar. We'll see that in Rashi, in Ramban. Understand? I'm sure you read that. I'm sure you remember that Rashi, that Ramban. Meaning, why is God telling Moshe Rabbeinu? Why is God Moshe getting nevuah? Why is he getting a paper from God in the middle of Pharaoh's palace? Because Moshe just said, no, I'm not coming back here again. And he has to come back and warn him about Makat Bechorot. He has to warn him. He has to come back. But Moshe says he's not coming back. So to make sure Moshe is not a liar, God's willing to give a nevuah in Pharaoh's palace. That's how they'll explain it. I want to give another explanation. I'll try to show that. Let me show you the Parshanim here. 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 The machloket, this about this unit. What happened? Ibn Ezra says it's a flashback. Vayomer Hashem, that's Vayomer Hashem is referring to this. Vayomer Hashem is this here. Vayomer Hashem, he's referring to these 3 psukim. I'll show you Ibn Ezra's in a minute. He's saying, Ibn Ezra's saying is that this pasuk here belongs here. And this is an insert. And say, this happened in the past, he's going to say. Watch how he says it. Here. What's he say, the Ibn Ezra? Vayomer Hashem, Haya ra'ui shetiyeh dveika b'pasuk hazeh parshat Vayomer Moshe kol mar Hashem kachatzot halayla. He says, pasuk Dalet should really be pasuk Aleph here. Okay? V'nichnasa b'neihem parshat od nega achad. That's our little insert. Okay? V'nei pirush Vayomer Hashem Moshe ukvar amar Hashem zeh leMoshe. God had already told this to Moshe. See what Ibn Ezra is saying? He's saying, this is a footnote. This is Chumash talking to the reader. The God had told him this. And then he says, when did Moshe tell him that? Back in Midian or back at the burning bush? He explains when it happened. That's Ibn Ezra. Rashi says, no. What's Rashi say? It's in real time. Moshe told Hashem. He's still standing in front of Pharaoh.
How much
When he gets his nevuah in the middle of Pharaoh's palace. What's his proof? Because he said, because after he leaves, he doesn't come back to see him again. Okay? He quotes Ramban, quotes Rashi. Elohim, God entered Pharaoh's palace. Why? Bishvil Moshe. For Moshe's sake, Shamar lo sifot ponecha. Because Moshe said, I'm not coming back here again. Surely Matzeh Badai, so Moshe should not have to become a liar and come back again. You understand Rashi Ramban? Now, I want to go back and I want to suggest something a little bit different. Okay? Someone translate for me, Pasuk Dalet, Kol Mar Hashem, translate Kechatzot Halayla Ani Yotzei B'toch Mitzrayim. Translate that for me to English. Translate in exact English.
I'll do this around midnight.
How about the hey? Halayla?
This night.
It's tonight at midnight, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kechatzot halayla. Tonight at midnight. Isn't it the simple reading? Kechatzot halayla ani yotzei b'toch Mitzrayim?
Yes.
Tonight at midnight is Makat B'chorot. I think that's a simple reading. Let's look at the English. We'll look at the English for a minute. I'm sure they got it. I mean, almost. Here, we'll take a look at the English. What's it say? Moshe, Moshe says, thus said the Lord, about midnight will I go out in Egypt. But he didn't say tonight at midnight, about midnight, but it's halayla, not kechatzot. Tonight at midnight will be Makat B'chorot. If that's the pshat, got it? Then when is this nevuah happening? If Moshe is saying now, tonight at midnight, it's over, Makat B'chorot, what's the date?
Same day.
Same day. Yeah.
Well, the 14th of Nisan, when they sacrificed the Korban Pesach.
This whole shout out between Moshe and Pharaoh is happening on the 14th in the morning when the people are bringing Korban Pesach already.
Yeah.
We're beginning already, aren't they?
Yeah.
Now, if it's the 14th, then when did Choshech happen? This whole argument happens right after Choshech, right?
Yeah.
So if the argument is on the 14th, Choshech was the 13th, 12th, 11th, 12th, and 13th, right?
Right.
What's that explain? Why did God tell Moshe to take the lamb on the 10th?
Before the Choshech.
Before Choshech, for sure. But what's the problem now? Why can't this be the 14th of Nisan? In Pshat, in simple Pshat. Who remembers why? Because 11 comes before 12. But where did we get Parshat HaChodesh? We didn't get Parshat HaChodesh yet. No, but let's assume for a minute the Chumash is out of order, like it never happens. It always happens, doesn't it? If Chumash is out of order, what do you have to say? The chapter 12, Parshat HaChodesh, happened before Choshech. Way before Choshech. Now, If you read Parshat HaChodesh, we're going to read that together.
I think Joel is right.
Want to see what Moshe finds out in Parshat HaChodesh? In Parshat HaChodesh? In chapter 12, what does God tell Moshe? Let's take a look. God tells Moshe, Merach take every bite on what do you call it? What's it? Besor l'chodesh hazeh. What's it say here? Besor l'chodesh hazeh. That explains why we take it on the 10th. So the Egypt will see us before the 3 days of Choshech, and they get all ready. And then what do we do? And keep it for saving until the 14th in the morning, right? And then shecht it in the afternoon. Right? Sprinkle it on your doors and eat it that night, etc., all dressed up and everything. Listen carefully. This is God talking to Moshe in Parshat HaChodesh.
So you
Yavarti
said
be'eretz Mitzrayim by Laila hazeh
COVID test.
on the 14th night.
You could go anyway.
B'keiti kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim.
He's been sick.
I'm going to
He'll be it.
smite every firstborn in Egypt. Mi'adam v'ad behema. V'chad Mitzrayim eshesh shvatim ani Hashem. V'yeh adam lechem la'ot al abatim asher tem sham brit yebam v'safi alechem v'lo negev v'mashchit b'akuti be'eretz Mitzrayim. Meaning what? When did Moshe find out the details of Makat B'chorot? 2 weeks earlier. Remember the question we asked, how does Moshe know? When Moshe says, Kechatzot halayla ani yotzei tov Mitzrayim, he knows that from 2 weeks ago. No Pharaoh yet, but he knows. But there's something he didn't know. Listen carefully. Here's my claim. It's like Moshe's in dark till Choshech. Meaning what? Moshe knows that the next plague is Makat B'chorot. Got it? After Choshech, he knows. When he and Pharaoh are having the shout out, what does Moshe know from 2 weeks ago? That tonight at midnight it's over. Okay? But what doesn't he know? He doesn't know it's the last plague. Because God doesn't tell him the purpose of Makat B'chorot is to save us from Makat B'chorot. The purpose of Korban Pesach is to save us from Makat B'chorot. I remember at my Seder, someone said, it was a really interesting comment he said, you know what? Even if God didn't take us out of Egypt that night and we were only saved from Makat B'chorot, it would be enough to say thank you and to bring Korban Pesach. In fact, if you miss that holiday, you can make it up a month later. And let's say your children ask you, remember Ma'avot Lechem? What do you tell them? The reason we bring Pesach is to remember Makat B'chorot, that God saved us. I would have Pesach even if we didn't leave Egypt that night. Don't you remember it's 2 different holidays, Pesach and Chag HaMatzot? They overlap. What I'm getting at is that God tells Moshe about the need for Korban Pesach to save us from Makat B'chorot. He didn't say we're leaving Egypt that night. Because what's been happening ever since chapter 7? What happens after every plague?
Hardens his heart.
Right?
No.
And Moshe doesn't know how long it's going to, he doesn't know. Maybe he probably thought there'd be 12 plagues, 20, who knows how many plagues, maybe 250, maybe 200, maybe 50. Someone brought that possibility up in my Seder also last year. But Moshe doesn't know how many plagues there's going to be. What does he know? What's God been doing after every plague? Hardening Pharaoh's heart. Right? When does Moshe find out that Makat B'chorot is the last plague?
When he's standing before Pharaoh.
In the middle. That's why he gets a beeper. Now it makes perfect sense. Let's look at the Psukim again. Look how precise this is. Moshe knows tonight at midnight it will be Makat B'chorot, right? And then Paro says, get out of here. I don't want to see you again, right? Moshe says, you're right, I'm not coming back here again. But that was Moshe's call, I'm not coming back here again, but he has to tell him about Makat B'chorot. So in the middle of his argument, what's Moshe need to know? That the next plague is the last plague. He knows what plague it is. He knows the next plague is Makat B'chorot. He didn't know it's the last plague. Because it's the last plague, that's why God has to tell him, you know what, this time I'm not going to harden his heart. Moshe needs to know that because up until now, ever since chapter 7, God's been hardening his heart. And this time he won't. Right? And this time he's going to kick you out. Like that was the plan. And therefore, because he's kicking you out, remind the people who are making Pesach tonight at midnight when it happens and they throw you out, make sure to borrow all the things you need. It's a last minute reminder to remind the people. Now that God told him that, what can Moshe say? Tonight at midnight is over, and you're going to come to me and you're going to send us out. And you're going to say, and then he leaves. God has to tell him the beepers so Moshe knows what to tell the Pharaoh before he leaves. Now, had God decided that beforehand? Or does God decide that it's the last plague because Moshe called it an audible? Like if I was teaching leadership, I'd say why does God decide that Makat Brachot is the last plague? Because Moshe finally made his own decision. Or the other way to look at it, because Pharaoh threatened to kill Moshe Rabbeinu, God's had it with Pharaoh. Whatever it is, or maybe God was the original plan. What I'm getting at is that this is the big chiddush that God's telling him in this last nevuah is that Makat Brachot is the last plague. Now watch. Now, why is it out of order? Look at the next two psukim that otherwise would not make any sense at all. Let's go back to the end of chapter 11. Moshe has this last conversation with Pharaoh.
Yes. Would it be terrible if I leave my
Look at the end of
class?
chapter 11. Let me just do a mute real fast. Do a quick mute. Okay.
I have
Okay. Sorry about that. And here we go. Look at the end of chapter 11. Okay. Moshe says, "Remember, look at these last two psukim and tell me why they don't make sense." V'yomer Hashem el Moshe, Lo yishma alechem paro leman revot mavtai be'eretz Mitzrayim. What's wrong with this pasuk? Why is God telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Paro won't listen to you, so I can make up all these miracles in Egypt?
He just told them that Paro was going to throw you out.
That's right. He says Paro this time he is going to listen to you. So why is God saying this? And look at this pasuk. Moshe and Aaron did all these muftim in front of Paro, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart and didn't send the people out. What is this? What's pasuk you're doing? What's the function of pasuk yud and actually tet and yud together? You know what they are? Look, they're separate parshiah and chumash. Take a look. Let me show the other screen. Look at them in chapter 11. Look how they're a separate parshiah. See that? See the samach? This is a separate parshiah. Right afterwards is Parshat HaChodesh. Remember? Chapter 12 is the next. That's already a new parshiah, Parshat HaChodesh. Remember I told you in the beginning here, 7:11? This is closure from chapter 7. Let me do it on the other source sheet here. Understand my point? These last two psukim are closing a unit, what I call 7:11. What's the unit? Has one topic. What was God doing? He was hardening Pharaoh's heart after every plague to get Egypt ready. Now, if I look at the whole big picture now, watch how I think it makes perfect sense. Here. Let me just show you again, this is summarize. What happened? We had a unit, actually I want a better source sheet here, this one. Here. Okay. We had a unit, okay, we did all this stuff, the strategy and stuff. We did all this here. We had the 9th plague and the last plague, here we go. Now, this isn't the source sheet I wanted. That's not this one, my mistake. Wrong source sheet, here we go. Shachtami. This one, here we go. Remember, chapter 7 began the unit in the beginning of chapter 7, Moshe told Pharaoh, let me just show you in Chumash, and it all ends over here. Chapter 12 starts a new unit. Oh, it's not good. Let me just go back to the other screen. My mistake. Chapter 7, here we go. Here it is. Okay. Regular Chumash. Chapter 7 began, remember chapter 7, we had the genealogies beforehand in chapter 6 that were the buffer. The unit of what? Of Paro not listening. Says like this. Baniak shedle Paro. Remember, you go tell him Shach b'nis merzo. Aniak shedle Paro. B'beiti tototai moftai. Paro won't listen to you, and I'll bring all my plagues, and then he'll send you out. Okay. And Moshe and Aaron are going to do everything that God commanded him. Okay. Moshe was 80 and Aaron was 83. That's the introduction to the unit. Then we have the 9 plagues plus Tanin in the beginning. And then what happens next? At the end of chapter 11, I close the unit. God tells Moshe, Lo yishma alechem Paro. That's what had happened. God had told Moshe, Paro won't listen to you. Leman raftai. And Moshe and Aaron did all these muftim, and Hashem hardened his heart and didn't send Bnei Israel out. That's up until now. But that's all going to change now with Makat Bechorot. Now, I told you between chapters 7 and 11, what do we have? God against Pharaoh, or God against the Egyptian people. We have to get Egypt ready for the Exodus. Now, in chapter 6, the beginning part of the era, Am Yisrael is not ready for the Exodus. Egypt's not ready for the Exodus, correct? Paro doubled our workload. Right? They need to be punished. Am Yisrael, they're not ready for redemption. Right? They're not ready. They're not ready because of the Kotzurach Mi'avodah Kasha. Before God can take us out of Egypt, He needs to get the Egyptians ready. By doing what? By bringing plagues and warning and convincing Egypt it's in their interest that we go serve our God. And then He has to get Am Yisrael ready, which would be Korban Pesach. Remember all the symbols, we have to reject Egyptian culture and everything, all the symbolism of Korban Pesach. So first I have one unit, 7-11, from chapter 7 to chapter 11, is a unit of getting Egypt ready. And what ties that whole unit together? God hardening Pharaoh's heart. I finished that unit, and now I go back to God getting Am Yisrael ready. Parshat HaChodesh, got it? Parshat HaChodesh. Now that Parshat HaChodesh is over, and 7-11 is over, now in the middle of chapter 12, like God can bring Makat Bechorot, because Egypt's ready to kick us out. But the Chazak Mitzrayim, Am Yisrael is ready to go because we brought Korban Pesach, and we know then you'll know that I'm your God who took you out of Egypt. It's me behind all these big events. And then we can leave Egypt. But I'm trying to explain why it's out of chronological order. Now let me show you which Parsha won't accept what I just told you. Ramban, right? But I want to show you how Ramban was so sensitive to this. Let me go back to my source sheet and I'll show you the Ramban. It's an awesome Ramban. Here. Remember the Ramban said, here, on Pasek Daled, Ramban points out Moshe's talking to Pharaoh, like we did. And he proves it from the end. Move this over. Like it says at the end. What's it say at the end? Okay, now it's talking about the word halayla. Got it? Listen. Okay. What's he saying? It doesn't say now what night it'll be. What was bothering Ramban? The word says halayla. But it can't mean tonight at midnight. Why? Why? You understand Ramban? Because Ramban has to keep Chumash in order. So halayla can't mean tonight at midnight, even though that's what it means. So what's he have to say? Some night at midnight. You see what he has to do? But what's forcing Ramban to do that? Because he holds Chumash is in order. If Chumash is in order, then Chatzat Halayla can't mean tonight at midnight because chapter 11 is before chapter 12. But if you hold Chumash is allowed to be out of order, and I gave a good reason why it is, then it can mean what he says, Chatzat Halayla. And then the story is really awesome. You follow? At the last minute, God tells Moshe, Moshe's in the dark until Choshech. Got it? Moshe doesn't know that the 10th plague is the last plague. And why did God know that ahead of time? Or is God deciding at the last minute because Moshe, because Moshe decided, I'm not coming back. Now Moshe's making his own decisions. God has a leader. Or because Pharaoh said, I'm going to kill you. Now it's time to get him out. That we don't know. But now everyone's ready now for the big moment. Now, just for the fun, we're not going to do this now because that's too long. But when we leave, you know what Pharaoh chases us? Now Phil's going to be okay. That's the main part of the share is over. You got that? That's why the top place Moshe being the unit of I call the 9 plagues or 10 plagues. But there's the unit 7-11 of the 9 plagues. Hope that's clear. And that explains why Moshe needs to get that nevuah in the middle of Pharaoh's palace, in the middle of the shout out. Now, if my explanation is right, why does Pharaoh change his mind? If he wants us to go serve our God, why does he chase us? So if you follow the story, I'll have them send you out the source sheet later. If I go back to, not this one, my mistake. If you follow the 3 days in the desert, it's like a charm. What happens? Remember, we're going to go 3 days in the desert. So we leave Egypt, okay? Remember, they kick us out, the whole thing, okay? So day 1 distance is from Ramses to Sukkot. Remember, Bnei Yisrael sent from Ramses to Sukkot, day 1. Okay? Day 2, and we're armed. Remember, we borrow arms as well. And we go from Eitam, I'm sorry, day 1 is Ramses to Sukkot. Day 2 distance is Sukkot to Etam at the edge of the desert. What should happen on day 3? They should go to the desert. But at the last minute, out of nowhere, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, everyone's expecting us to go to the desert. Everyone's following us, the Erev Rav, CNN, the whole thing. We're all being followed. And the last minute, what does God tell Moshe? Tell Bnei Yisrael v'yashuvu. Go back to Egypt, towards Egypt, and set up camp on the Egyptian side of the Red Sea, between Be'er Migdol Ben Hayam. Okay, set up so that Pharaoh will think that you're not going to the desert, that they're stuck in the land. And ours means in the land of Egypt. Okay, and I'm going to harden his heart to make him chase you. Now, what's going to happen? Pharaoh's going to find out that the people ran away. He sent them out, right? But what's saying, they didn't run away from Egypt. They ran away from slavery. Basically, what's God doing? God's telling us at the last minute, don't go to the desert, take a day off, set up camp by the Red Sea on the Egyptian side, so that Egypt will think what? We're not going to the desert. If we're not going to the desert and we're not coming back to Ramses and we're going towards southern Egypt, what does Egypt intelligence think? What are we doing?
We're going to rebel.
What they were worried about from day one. They were always worried. They're not really going to the desert to serve the God. They're going to take over our country. Right? And what happens? Had we gone to the desert, they would have left us alone. Go serve your God. Take as long as you need. Got it? But because we don't go to the desert and we go back towards Egypt, how do they interpret that? They're coming back to attack. Now, we didn't say that, but that's what Egyptian intelligence understood. Because that was their read of why. We said we're going to the desert, and we turn around and come back towards Egypt, and we're armed, and we have all the gold and silver. And therefore, time is the more time you give Am Yisrael now, the more time they'll be organized, and therefore Pharaoh has to call a blitz. And that's why Biasot Richbo. But Pharaoh's convinced the Jews are not going to the desert to serve the God. They're coming back to Egypt, possibly to take over. And that's why he declares war. Once he declares war, he gets washed out. But because he declared war, what happens? All the things that we borrowed are now nationalized. And now we have the Rechush Gadol and it's legal. Anyway, that's the story. That's a whole different share. I know my time's up. But I just want to put those last 5 minutes in. But it's way better. The book's way better than the movie, isn't it? Yeah, Phil?
Oh.
Phil, you had a question, Phil?
Thank you.
What?
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry.
Okay, good. Okay. Any other questions on that?
Yes. Ralph?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You said how did Moshe know that the Bechor, the brother Bechor, was the last one, right? Because Hashem told him at the snake that he won't let you go, and I'm going to kill his firstborn. Moshe's waiting for that plague. It hasn't come yet.
I said that before at the snake, he says that.
Yeah.
It's part of a warning, but that's very cryptic there. In fact, some people say he's talking about Moshe's firstborn. Some people say some parts want to say that God told Moshe, if you don't do your job, I'll kill your firstborn, and that explains the incident with the hotel. Anyway, but it doesn't give the details about Kat Bechorot. The details he gets in Parshat HaChodesh.
Makat Bechorot, a very strange story in the middle of everything.
Yeah, but that starts with B'nai Bechor Yisrael. Who's firstborn? The most powerful nation. Who's God's firstborn nation? Who represents God? The Bechor is going to be in charge of the family. That's who's going to be the model of behavior for society. A nation that enslaves migrants and is all about power because we have the power and uses leverage because we're the mighty Egyptian people, or a nation that does tzedek and mishpat. Who's B'nai Bechor Yisrael? That's the biggest theme of Chumash, of coming out of Egypt. But which nation is going to represent God? A nation that uses its power as leverage to oppress other people, or a nation that sets up a country based on justice and righteousness and cares for the poor and the needy?
You're taking us into a discussion of contemporary.
No, it nothing to do with contemporary issues.
That's the different question, though.
That's a different question. I'm talking about what Chumash is saying. Chumash wants a nation that sanctifies God That you can't miss in Chumash. God wants a nation that will sanctify God by how they treat, what they do with their power, what they do with their wealth, what they do with their strength.
Yaakov's crossing his hands made the point that everybody could be contemporary. I want the best guy, and I hope it's the first, the oldest. But if he's not if he's not competent, whoever's competent.
Yeah. But the blessing is is v'yasem lecha shalom. Means Ephraim and Menashe can both be great, but the fact that one's a Bechor doesn't mean he's more powerful than the other. And they can live in peace with each other.
Yeah.
Ephraim and Menashe are both Vigulur B'Kerev Haaretz. They're both beating, and they don't have to be in competition like Yaakov and Esav were. You can share power. The blessing of Ephraim and Menashe, meaning you can everyone can share. You can have your power. Like the fact you don't have to fight with each other all the time over success. You can share your success and work together. That's the Simcha Ephraim and Menashe.
You trying to say something contemporary
I
now?
crossed into Eretz Yisrael. They did fight, and
they didn't listen to that. They were supposed to get along.
Yeah, that was the tragedy.
Yeah, God split the kingdom so there would be a coalition. Instead, remember, Yerovam wasn't willing to share, and he made his own temple.
Yeah.
God wanted him to share the kingdom, and they said that was the chet that brought down Bayit Rishon.
Yeah.
Anyway, my time's up. I know I have to give you guys a break, so we'll stop here. And I was.